Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me today in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and, oh yeah, that sometimes messy thing that we call life. This podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com. All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, thanks so much for joining us yet again. And I'm here with actually a longtime friend, Mike Colón. Mike, thanks so much for making time for the Bokeh Podcast today.
Nathan, thanks, man. It's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to it.
And it's funny even to have the formality of that introduction because we've known each other for a long time. And I was actually telling a couple of people, having you on the podcast is kind of an interesting thing. You were in, I think there was a book when early on in my wedding photography career that was called The Art of Digital Wedding Photography. Were you in that book?
Was that like a Bill Herder book? I think I remember that one.
Something like that. Yeah, there were 2 or 3 books that I looked through as a wedding photographer for inspiration, and I think there were people like yourself and Denis Reggie and Bambi Cantrell and Joe Photo and a list. And I had some DVDs too, of course, back in the day of DVDs, where I'd go through and watch these DVDs just for inspiration. And you were one of those photographers that I'd kind of looked to for inspiration at your style, the way that you were certainly approaching business. I had the opportunity to attend a workshop that you did years ago in California. So it's a privilege not only to have you on here because you're a friend, we've had the opportunity to spend time together in the industry and then outside the industry as well, but just because I looked up to you for so long too. So it's really kind of like full circle. And I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today.
Yeah, man. We've definitely had our experiences together and been through the industry, and then also like our trip to Italy together and Yosemite, and we go way back, man.
we do, yeah. And it's fun to kind of think back, and we could probably do individual podcast episodes almost on each of those adventures. You mentioned Yosemite. That was just this past October with a group of guys, and that was tons of fun. In fact, that was actually a first for me. I don't know if I told you guys this when I was there, but I was never like a guy's guy. I didn't have a lot of guy friends growing up, and I just, for whatever reason, I just didn't develop close relationships with guys. So I had the opportunity to go with you, and I think there was 8 or so of us to Yosemite and kind of glamp, if you will, and spend a few days there in Yosemite and hike up to Half Dome. And some of you guys climbed all the way to the top. But that was a really fun adventure for me and a unique experience for me. And then you mentioned Italy. You and I had the opportunity to go to Kenny Kim's wedding, and of course you photographed Kenny's wedding in Italy a number of years ago. Yeah. That was an adventure too. So yeah, a variety of experiences, but thanks for all that you've done, certainly for the industry and inspiring me as well, and also for your friendship and for making time again for the Bokeh Podcast today. And we're just going to jump right in. Something that we've been doing recently with the podcast is to start it off with what I call a technique for time or tool for time. So much of what we do at Photographers Edit and what we talk about here at the Bokeh Podcast is about saving photographers time. And so I'm curious, is there a particular tip or tool or technique, something that you do to create more freedom for yourself, for your family as a business owner?
Yeah, well, I got to say that this is one of my biggest struggles as well, is making time for the right things, keeping my priorities straight. One thing that I use is iCal. It's just my calendar, in the Apple system. It's just my wife and I share that calendar, and anytime that, well, first of all, like I want to be intentional about making time for my family. So you could let your life go by, honestly, and like all the things that are important to you kind of push to the wayside. And I found that just like looking at my calendar and saying, okay, well, I want to do a camping trip with my family. I want to spend some time with my wife. I just make that appointment in my calendar and block it off. That way it's in there. It pops up on her calendar. She kind of approves it on her end, and it adds to her calendar as well. And it kind of puts it in stone. And then I move forward even with, like, say, booking something. Like I'll book a flight, or I'll book like a campground or something like that. I'll make reservations. That just holds me accountable. And there's some investment there, to hold me accountable to that.
Yeah, and this is interesting because we've had at least a few photographers that have mentioned just the simple notion of actually scheduling things. And then, of course, it's important in a relationship, too, that there is there is communication. I mean, without that communication, even if it's not purposeful, it's easy sometimes to forget to let your significant other know this detail or that detail, or to schedule something, but forget to put it in a shared calendar, like you're pointing out. Actually making that proactive effort to schedule something, not only for the sake of keeping up for it for yourself, but also for communicating with your partner, is so important. It may seem like a simple notion, but it's funny, I think, how many photographers still don't even make that little effort at creating a little bit of organization, being very intentional, like you're saying, with your time, and then making sure there's communication with their significant other or others. I actually share a calendar with my kids too, because they've got so cool. much going on with sports and music and whatnot. And then, of course, I have to keep up with everything going on with business and travel. I just spent this last weekend with two of my brothers, rather, and my dad. We got to go ride motorcycles for the weekend. That was a lot of fun. But like managing all of that, plus business, plus family life, it just gets really complicated. So yeah, just taking advantage of simple tools that are right there in front of us. They're free to use or inexpensive to use. I think it's really smart. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us just to be really intentional with our time. You mentioned your family too. Tell us just a little bit about your family for those listening in that may not know a whole lot about you.
Yeah, so I have 4 kids. Age ranges from 8 to 14. I've been married for 18 years now. It was 18 years in January.
Wow, so, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, my wife kind of started the business with me, and then when she started popping out those kids, we kind of made a shift, and I hired some people on, and she took over with the family and being able to stay at home with the kids and just being a great mom and on that side of things. And then, it's kind of had people help me with the business so I could focus on that.
Now, you've been married for 18 years. How long have you actually been a professional photographer?
I started shooting in 95. So what is that? 23 years? 23 years.
Yeah, that would be it. 95. And do I remember correctly that you started as a sports photographer? Is that right?
Yeah, it sounds like that. I think I list that on my bio, talking about how I shot sports in the beginning, but it was more like I would shoot team photos for sporting teams, like I'd shoot big group shots of football teams. And we shot like the giant group. I worked for this company called Yeri Photography, and we shot group shots for like all over Southern California for like high schools, colleges, pro sports, lifeguards, Camp Pendleton Marine Corps. Like we just do these giant group shots on these big bleachers, like risers that we would set up.
Yeah, it's funny. There's that type of photography, group photography, really, or group sports photography is a pretty significant industry out there. And it's not something that, especially in the wedding and portrait photographer world, that you hear a whole lot about. But my dad, actually, to make some extra cash for a number of years, he'd actually go to bowling tournaments and photograph bowling teams. And it's the most random thing in the world. But they'd show up for the weekend, they'd shoot the tournament, they'd print out products, or at least prints there on site, and do this whole thing for the weekend and then leave. And they'd repeat that process over and over and over again. And you could actually make a good chunk of change doing that.
Oh yeah. The company that I worked for was huge. We had something like 15 photographers, and they stayed really busy. I think they're still in business to this day, but that was my very first photography job that I ever had. My buddy, Jeremy Lucero, who's actually a wedding photographer, you might know him. Jeremy got me that first job. He found out I was interested, and I bought some camera gear, and he's like, "Hey Mike, I could probably get you a job where I work." And that was my first photo job.
And then how did you transition from that into, wedding photography really is your thing. Of course, you also shoot fashion. But how did you get into wedding photography from doing that group photography?
Yeah. So, originally my interest with photography was like snowboarding. So that might be another thing that you were thinking about with sports, because I used to shoot like snowboarding and surfing and things like that. It was more for my friends, and I'd pick up a couple jobs here and there. But what I realized was that industry was a little bit flaky. And there wasn't really, I didn't feel like there was a sustainable income in that industry, because too many photographers were willing to do that stuff for free. It was fun. It was exciting, kind of glamorous. So photographers would be like, just wanted to get published, and they'd be doing that stuff for free. So I found, through a friend of mine, I found this guy named Jim Sisko, who was a wedding photographer in Southern California, in Orange County. And Jim was actually looking for kind of an apprentice, someone who would train under him and shoot weddings very similar to his style, that he could refer weddings to. So I started working under him. And one summer, I think I shot like 15, 20 weddings as his assistant.
Wow.
And that's how I got into it. That's how I learned.
And did you just kind of go directly from being an assistant or a second shooter for him to launching your own business? Or what was that transition look? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I feel like I was so fortunate. I mean, Jim was amazing because this guy would teach me kind of the ropes at the wedding. I got to watch him in action. So I learned a ton that one summer. And then as he wasn't paying me to be his assistant, he kind of was telling me like, hey, this is kind of an internship, but he would start referring me some jobs. So he referred me like family portraits, things that he trusted me to handle well, simple jobs and things like that. And he let me take the money from that, from the client. And then eventually the goal, and I think the original intention behind all of it was so that he could start referring me jobs and taking a commission. Like it was basically like I would be an associate, not really under his brand. I set it up under my own brand, but he would refer me a job. I would sit down with the client in his studio. He would sell them. I really didn't have to do a lot of talking at all. I just kind of sit there and be like present and smile, you know, and Jim would show them the portfolio that he helped me put together with basically a lot of the setups in the book were like his setups that I shot over his shoulder and things like that. He'd be like, Mike, get in here and shoot this. And so he basically set me up with a portfolio, and then he would have me meet with his clients, and he would do all the sales, and then he would book me on a job. I would get 75%. He would get 25%. Obviously, I had to cover the cost of albums and handle all the work and interaction with the client. He just take the 25% and move on to the next job. But it was such a win-win. It was such a great scenario, and I was so fortunate to be there because that's how I built my business. So he let me take all the future referrals from that client for free. I didn't have to pay him commission on future referrals.
Wow.
It was just the direct referrals that he sent my way. He would charge me that 25% commission. So it was like a great kickstart to my business. And honestly, like I look back on that and I love the guy for it. He was just an amazing dude.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, a win-win scenario. You get to actually watch somebody who has an established business and he's sending you work as well. That's not something you get to hear about a lot. You've been shooting for about 20 years, you've been a wedding photographer rather for about 20 years. In that time frame, and I mean, the work that I've seen come from, I mean, on your website or in social media or otherwise, the style has seemed to stay quite consistent. But style is one thing. What would you actually say your business's brand position is? What sets you apart from the other wedding photographers in that massive California market?
Yeah, so I took a position early on as kind of a high-end wedding photographer, someone who was going after the bigger, kind of fancier weddings, the big, like, $100,000 plus weddings. I did that by raising my prices and kind of really targeting those clients and trying to understand what they wanted as far as the style of photography, or what they wanted as far as like products and quality of albums and prints and frames and things like that. And then also just trying to understand what they expected as far as service goes, as far as like, you know, how much personal service I need to put into those clients. And so I would charge more, but I would book fewer clients, and I would just really focus on them and give them really like, you know, hands-on service and just really take care of them. And that was my position early on. I think I've always kind of went that direction. Over the years, I got into shooting editorial for Wedding Style magazine. That was, I became kind of a contributing photographer to that magazine, and I started going to New York and shooting fashion and shooting like all kinds of editorial work for that magazine, which opened the door to shooting more wedding fashion. And so I feel like right now my brand position and what people know me as and try to hire me for is for, I kind of bring that little bit of like wedding fashion edge to my weddings for my real wedding clients, and vice versa. I try to bring kind of a real and natural feel to my wedding fashion that I learned by shooting real weddings.
Yeah, and I remember that. I would go, I mean, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I would go to your website. This is years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago, maybe more. I'd go to your website on a relatively regular basis just to kind of, I knew that this photography style, this photographic style that this guy named Mike Colón in California, that he represented, that he was shooting, like this was the look that I was really going for. And I'd regularly go to your website just to see what you had posted there. And you had a really clean, very minimalist design to your website, which was really beautiful because it helped emphasize the imagery. I really loved that. But how do you, at this point, I mean, you said you were focusing on that high-end brand initially, and I know that I learned quite a bit from you in regards to how to create a higher-end brand. I was actually shooting in the Chattanooga market. The first wedding I ever shot was $350, and I lost money on that. And I grew to the point where I was shooting $10,000, as much as $10,000 for a wedding, which in the Chattanooga market was quite high. You're talking about shooting $100,000+ weddings, and that naturally puts you in the top 5 or maybe even top 3% of wedding photography that's happening in the US. But to shoot that style of wedding and then to start to kind of mix editorial, that editorial look to your imagery, how do you communicate all of that to your clients when you're trying to sell them as a photographer? I mean, do you do that through your website? Is it in-person conversation? How do you communicate the brand position?
Yes. I mean, really, like lately, my work has been, my marketing has been focused on social media. My website's been under construction, I guess you could say, for a few months now. And I took down my old website, which I felt like was a pretty good representation of my work, but I just felt like it was getting dated and a little bit stale. So I took it down and been working on a new website ever since, which, as you know, websites take a long time. And it's, I think, just trying to put together the right imagery and putting together the imagery that I feel confident as like represents my brand well and the direction that I'm moving towards in the future.
Yeah.
That takes some time, and that's been kind of like a difficult thing for me. And so I want to do it right, and I want to come out with a bang. And so I've been spending some serious time focusing on which images I'm going to put on there and kind of putting together that portfolio. And also the design of the site needs to communicate that. But aside from the website, I've been focusing on social media and focusing on just getting published, whether that be through online publications or print publications. I still work with Wedding Style Magazine and a number of others. But I think that brides mostly find me through word of mouth referrals from my past clients that I've shot for and through social media. That's kind of been where I've been successful at getting those clients. And so they see my work on social media mostly.
And I have to throw out your Instagram account. It really is beautiful. In fact, I just pulled it up here while you were talking. If you guys for those of you listening in, you can go to, of course, Instagram, Mike Colón, just like it sounds, Mike and then Colon. And in the future, when Mike's website goes live, it is MikeColón.com. It's linked from his Instagram account as well. But definitely check out his work there. It's absolutely stunning. And I'm curious, what, as a photographer now that has been in the industry for quite some time, I have a lot of respect actually for the consistency in the style that you've maintained as far as your photography is concerned. And you're obviously shooting in the same realm as far as the client base is concerned as well. But throughout all that time, what would you say is one of the toughest lessons that you've learned as a business owner, as a photographer?
Definitely one of the toughest lessons I've learned is, I heard this line from Denis Reggie. Actually, you mentioned Denis Reggie earlier. He was a mentor of mine. And I had all of his, not DVDs, but VHS tapes.
Yes.
So I'm kind of dating myself a bit. But it was like 8 hours or something crazy of VHS tapes that I'd sit on my couch with my wife and we'd watch and I'd learn from it. One thing that really stood out to me in my mind, one thing he said, and I wish I listened to it, was he said that once you start, you can never stop. And he's talking about marketing. He's talking about kind of pushing that marketing vehicle or whatever it is,
yeah.
Pushing that. I used to call it like this. Picture this giant Indiana Jones sized boulder, and you're pushing it up this hill, and you got to push, and you get some friends to help you, and you get some other people, some industry associates and contacts in the industry to help you push, and everyone starts getting on your side, and they see that ball rolling, and they push, and it finally gets to like the top of the hill, and then you push it over that hill, and then it starts going down, and then it starts snowballing, like getting bigger and bigger, and then it's unstoppable. And I used to give that analogy, but honestly, looking back, I think like, well, I don't know if that analogy is true. I feel like it's a constant uphill push, and yeah, you get some momentum, and you go down some hills and things like that. But like Denis Reggie said, once you start pushing, you can't stop. And maybe when you retire someday, you could stop. But you got to always be feeding that fire and always be pushing that boulder. And if it ever slows down and stops, it's like starting over again. You got to get that thing. Got to get a bunch of help and a bunch of effort and a bunch of money and start pushing that thing forward again. And so if I could kind of talk about my one thing that I learned, something big that I learned in my business, you can't stop. Like I got comfortable. I don't know if I got comfortable or if I got burnout, but after 10 years of doing my business, I kind of was like over the marketing game. I was like, okay, I'm just kind of burnt out on this marketing game. I'm kind of, I kind of feel like I reached a plateau, so to speak, and I'm just going to pass my business off to my employees, let them answer the phones, let them talk to my clients, let them book. I even hired like someone who would book me, kind of like a booking agent, let her handle all my phone calls. And I just went and did jujitsu, and I started doing this Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I was like, okay, this is fun, and I'm getting back in shape, and I'm on cruise control. But what I found after another several years of coasting on cruise control is that I started to see my business take a dive.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh crap, like I need to get back in this. And my wife was concerned and I was concerned. And so, luckily I caught it before it stopped, before the ball stopped rolling. I caught it with still a little bit of momentum and started pushing again. But yeah, that's probably my tip is like, and I don't want to like freak people out. I mean, people think that, oh my, this is so depressing. I'm never going to be able to stop or relax. Like I'm going to have to work hard forever. But I mean, that's life, right? We got to work. And once you stop working, you got to expect things to slow down. So you got to pace yourself. You got to stay inspired. You got to, do something that you really love and find ways to keep it really interesting and find ways to constantly improve.
Yeah, and you mentioned that word inspired, and we're going to actually dive into that very topic in just a little bit, how to actually stay inspired as a photographer, because that really is tough. But I'm getting goosebumps listening to you talking about this, because this has actually been a hard lesson that I've learned over the years as well. When I started Photographer's Edit, the goal was initially to create a business, a machine almost, that would run itself. And I wanted to be able to have even more freedom and flexibility in my life as an entrepreneur, largely for the sake of my family. So my motivation wasn't bad, but to your very point, once I got that ball rolling, I got too comfortable, and I see now. I mean, within the first, I'd say 3 years or so of starting Photographer's Edit, I was able to work as little as 3 or 4 hours a week. I had this wonderful team of people behind me that were making this model work, and I had built up momentum in the industry as a photographer, speaking and sharing and helping other photographers, and that helped kind of give me some momentum, connections, and so forth. And I was able to take advantage of that, but I got a little bit lax and maybe even a lot lax. And I kind of went to the opposite extreme. Instead of working really, really hard, and then backing off and finding a little bit of balance, but keeping the momentum going, I worked really, really hard and then just sat back, threw my legs up and took a break. And I see how that ultimately hurt the trajectory of my business over the long run. So I love that you're bringing this point up. We can't ever stop. There's no reason we can't find balance. There's no reason we can't take breaks. I mean, we don't go on multi-day trips to Yosemite or take motorcycle rides with our family or whatever the case without creating that space. And you have to do that intentionally, like you said earlier. But we do have to keep the ball rolling. I'm reminded of this on a regular basis by a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk too. And I bring him up a lot here on the podcast because he's been a significant reminder for me of the importance of not stopping. And again, I don't care to be the 60 or 80 hour a week entrepreneur like Gary is. And I would venture you probably feel the same, but there is something to be said for consistency and realizing that if we do want to maintain a brand presence and if we want to have a sustainable business, we do have to put that time and that effort in. And so this is a really great reminder. I don't think any other photographer has brought up that very point on the podcast yet. And I'm glad that you make that point for our listeners. I think that's really powerful. Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to add real quick was I think there's also seasons, I think that if you're a photographer out there and you're thinking oh man, I can never stop. This is horrible. And I'm really getting burnt out. Just remember there's seasons and honestly, it's okay to take your foot off the gas for a period of time. It's okay even to let your business slip for a period of time. If you need to refocus on your family, if you need to spend more time, your kids are growing up, you're missing their childhood, something like that. I feel strongly that there's seasons in our life and I feel like I took my foot off the gas to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then I kind of left it off the gas to kind of focus on my kids and my family and just making sure that I was there and present for their childhood. I wasn't just constantly traveling, jumping on a plane to go to a workshop here or a shoot there. I was just being more intentional about spending time with my family. And my business suffered, but you know what? It was a season of really just focusing on my family. And now as my kids are getting a little older, I still feel like I don't want to miss out on anything. So I'm still being careful about how much gas I feed that engine, But I realize that I also have to provide for their college and I have to, pay for weddings coming up and things like that. That's all in my future. So I got to be careful. I got to kind of find that balance, like you said. And it's about it's okay to kind of go through some seasons, but if you can kind of mellow out those ups and downs and kind of find some kind of neutral ground to coast on, but also be working hard and spending time with your family, then that's where you want to be, I think.
Oh, I love it. And I mean, we could almost end the podcast just with that because that's such a powerful lesson. It's a good reminder. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I'm going to actually
man, there's so much more. You can't end it yet.
There is. And we are going to get to that actually. Before we do, tell me, I know you love your gear. We've talked gear a good bit over the years. What is something that is in your gear bag that's a favorite of yours, whether it's a camera body or a lens or an accessory of some kind? What's a favorite thing?
I think obviously my all-time favorite thing right now, I don't know why I said obviously, but my all-time favorite thing is my A7R3, the camera body, and my Sony camera body. because it just has this amazing files, like it's 42 megapixels. It just like handles low light. It's got crazy dynamic range, and it's like this new technology. If you're not familiar with mirrorless technology, you need to look into it. It's kind of becoming mainstream right now. So I'm sure you've heard of it at least, but there's a reason why I switched from Nikon to Sony. But I shot pretty much Nikon my whole career, and I in the last 3 years or 4 years, I've been heavily, only exclusively shooting Sony. And it's the whole mirrorless thing. It's such a crazy technology that I knew back then when I first picked up a mirrorless camera, I knew back then that it was going to be the future, that all cameras would have to go this direction because it just made sense.
Yeah.
And then I spent the last 3 or 4 years trying to talk my friends into it. Like, hey, like, why are you guys not shooting mirrorless yet? It's crazy to me. Like, have you not tried this? And I'm like, and it's kind of like ignited this fire in me to tell the world about it. But kind of like the same excitement I had when I went from film to digital.
Yeah.
Like, there's this new technology that's going to make your life easier. It's going to make your photography better. It's going to make you better at what you do. And we should always be jumping on board with this new gear. But yeah, if you haven't looked into it, I mean, the biggest thing about that I can say about the A7R3 is that this mirrorless technology lets you see what you're shooting before you shoot. So you don't have to constantly take test shots and look at the back of your camera. You have this confidence. You're looking through the lens and you're seeing all the effects of your camera settings in real time, in live view before you shoot. So if you're sitting there waiting for the first kiss at the wedding, you don't have to quickly take a test shot, look at the back of the camera, and then get back into position to shoot.
Yeah.
To make sure you're going to expose it right, that your settings weren't off or something. You have the confidence of knowing that, like, man, what I see right now is exactly what I'm going to see after I click this shutter. So that's my super exciting thing in my bag. Is the A7R3. It's just an amazing camera. It shoots 10 frames a second. They've kind of worked out most of the kinks. I'm sure, like, this is going to be so dated. In a couple of years, we're going to be talking about some other camera body. But like right now, this thing's blowing my mind.
Yeah, I remember. Well, first of all, I have to say one of my favorite things about you, Mike, is the kind of childlike excitement that you still get about things. You've exuded this. It's driven your effort with jiu-jitsu, which has taken you to an elite level. And I certainly saw it when we hung out in Yosemite last fall. But I actually saw it during that trip when you were talking to me about your Sony camera, that just the level of excitement in your eyes and the tone of your voice as you were talking about the technology was contagious. You were just so stoked about this thing. And I do remember, I mean, I know what you're talking about, when that transition from film to digital. I mean, there were some frustrations and kind of trying to figure out the kind of the kinks and working with a printer and actually getting decent prints from it and all that stuff. But playing with new technology is so much fun, but then when it enables you to be able to do your job so much better too, that's incredible. And so gone are the days of what we used to so lovingly call chimping. As we take a picture, right, quickly glance at the back, take another picture, making another adjustment, glance at the back of the camera, you can negate that and work a lot more efficiently. And 10 frames a second, I think you were actually demonstrating that to me when we were in the park, just like barely even push that shutter button and boom, you've got 8-10 frames just like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, the other big thing about this camera that no other camera is doing right now is the eye autofocus. And if you're a portrait or wedding photographer, anyone who shoots people, you know that when you're shooting a person, you want the eye to be razor sharp. And so we're constantly like moving the focus selector around the face, trying to nail the face or something in the same plane as the face, and trying to catch focus and follow focus. And what this camera does for you, which is almost like crazy, I feel like it's going to put guys like me out of business because it just makes photography too easy, is it just locks onto the eye. So you get this little green square right onto the closest eye to the camera, and it just locks onto that eye. You can compose the image however you want, move the camera around, get creative, shoot any angle, any composition, and the eye is going to be sharp. And so, like, that just blows my mind. And I can't believe that other photographers that are still shooting like DSLRs or Nikon or Canon or any other manufacturer, they haven't picked up on this. And so I'm trying to tell people, like, guys, this is game changing. This eye autofocus alone should make you want to shoot with this camera.
Yeah.
And all the Sony cameras have it. And if you haven't tried it yet, you got to at least go like play with someone who has a Sony camera and just like test it out. But that feature alone makes it worth considering, at least.
Okay, well, we'll make sure to link.
And I get all excited about it because it's like, man, I use this like every day when I shoot. Like, when I'm shooting, I'm just like, that used to be my biggest frustration, was trying to, I like to shoot wide open with like super shallow depth of field, 1.4 lenses. And I want the eyes sharp. And then it was so frustrating in post-production trying to like check focus. I'd be like, oh, that's a great shot. And then I'd click to zoom into 100% to make sure the eyes are sharp. And then I'd have to sit there and wait for that little spinning wheel for a couple seconds. And then it snaps in and then I could see whether or not I nailed the eye. And honestly, in all my days of shooting Nikon, the highest percentage I got was maybe about like 70 to 80% in sharpness on the eyes. And now when I'm editing, I'm just like, I don't even zoom in anymore. I like pretty much, I'm 99% sure that image is going to be razor sharp on the eye. Like when that thing snaps in, when I view it 100%, that I'm going to see like the red veins in the eyeball, you know? So like it's eliminated a lot of time in post-production. I know the image is going to be sharp, and I don't know, man, it's like a game changer for me.
That's awesome. Okay, well, we're going to link to the camera certainly in the show notes, and if you guys haven't had the opportunity to play with that technology yet, make sure you check it out. We're going to actually jump now to the topic that I mentioned earlier, this notion of how to stay inspired as a photographer. This is a really loaded topic, and I think one that we're going to kind of give an introductory episode to today, and I'm sure it's one that we can come back to again at another point. But it's a big topic because not only as photographers, but as entrepreneurs, it's easy to get burnt out. And largely, especially when it comes to photographers, because we're emotional beings, right? I mean, I know that I am. I have. There's a tendency that I still have to fight to kind of ride this roller coaster of emotion. There may be some days that I'm really high and I'm feeling really great and I'm driven, I'm motivated, and others, maybe something happens in my life and I just kind of react to it and let myself get down. And then I got to get back up from that. And so riding this kind of roller coaster state of emotions, it unfortunately has a really negative effect on our business. Why do you think photographers let themselves get caught up in that?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think part of it is that most photographers feel like they're making it up as they go along. Most photographers are like, feel all alone. They're working in their own little home office or on their laptop at Starbucks. They're not really interacting with people. They're small businesses. A lot of people don't even have interns or associates or employees or anything. So we're all alone in this. And like, I mean, sometimes even just to pull myself out of bed in the morning, I'm just like, I think I'm just going to sleep a little longer because I don't even want to deal with all the things I have to do.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get burned out. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. It's easy to feel behind and like you feel like you procrastinated and now you're letting people down or there's a lot of different emotions that come into it. And that affects, like for me, if you're like me, I shut down when I get overwhelmed. I tend to shut down. I just kind of want to stick my head in the sand and feel like just pretend nothing's going wrong, like ignorance is bliss.
I totally get it. Yep.
And then you don't have really anyone keeping you accountable. You're your own boss. So like I tell my son all the time, I'm like, you're lucky you have a dad that whips you into shape. You're lucky, not physically, I don't whip him, but you're lucky you have a dad who kind of keeps you on track and like holds you accountable, because I wish I had a dad looking over my shoulder all day long. You're so lucky. Like, I need someone to do this for me. And I'm doing things that I wish I had going on in my own career. Like I wish I had a mentor looking over my shoulder constantly to keep me on track and tell me what to do and tell me which decisions are right, which decisions are wrong. And what I realized is like, I need to kind of like ease off my son and let him figure stuff out on his own, because I need to prepare him for what I'm going through right now.
Yeah.
I need to prepare him for like, making it up as you go, like figuring it out, learning how to stay inspired when you don't feel like it, when you don't feel inspired,
So what do you think the balance is then between kind of being emotional, passionate artist types? Because I mean, I know how that it can help drive our craft, right? If we're just kind of robotically, mechanically creating photographs and then handing those over to our clients, our work will likely suffer as a result. But then at the same time, we have to be logical. We have to be practical. We have to be pragmatic. We ultimately have a business to run. We have to figure out systems that will enable us to run it efficiently and sustainably. What's the balance between being that emotional artist type, but then also realizing that we have to be logical and practical and be disciplined and consistent? Where is the balance in there, and how do you find that?
That's the biggest problem that I face, and that I think most creatives face, especially self-employed, people like I was talking about with no accountability, with no one kind of running business stuff for them. You got to be creative, and you also got to be business minded. You got to understand like systems and also understand art. And it's a crazy dichotomy. It's really hard to do. But from my experience, the best thing that's worked for me especially to stay inspired and to stay on an emotional high, to be able to work. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, you'll get the work done if you're passionate about it, if you love it. You know, if you don't love it, if you don't see a future in it, if you don't feel like you're heading down the right path, if you don't really know where you're headed, like, why do the work? Like, why even try? You know, and so in order for me to stay inspired, I have to kind of have the big picture figured out. I have to know where I'm headed. I have to think about, okay, am I on the right track? Is this what I want long-term for my life? Is this good for my family? Is this good for me? Am I going to be happy? Is this sustainable? And so once I get that big picture figured out, then all the little tasks, the day-to-day tasks, you know, everything else kind of falls into place, and I'll do the hard work. I won't be lazy. I won't procrastinate. I'll get it done because I believe in the big picture. And so I think that's like, first and foremost, like, we need to get that big picture figured out. We need to like take a little retreat, for me, it's like go out to Joshua Tree by myself. And I can't go to a campsite near other people because I'll start talking to them. But like, I got to find my own like off the grid campsite. I have to get alone with God and be like, pray, figure out where I'm headed, where I want to be. What is my life about? You know, it's like that big picture. You got to make sure that that's like clear before you start doing the day-to-day tasks. If you're just like doing stuff and you don't really believe in where you're headed, then I got a feeling everything's gonna be way harder. From my experience, everything's way harder. I don't want to clean my office until I know what the finished picture of my office should look like. You know, if it's a big disaster and mess, like, I don't even want to start. I'll let it get so messy. And so like, I want to figure out exactly how the office should look. I want to know where the furniture should be and where everything goes and where the homes of everything is before I even start cleaning up. Otherwise, what's the point of cleaning up? It's just going to get messy again. And so,
and I think that question of what is the point is a question that a lot of photographers haven't answered. I mean, you made the point earlier that a lot of photographers, and I've certainly been guilty of it, kind of just function in this haphazard way, right? That day to day, they're just kind of doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. A lot of times they're reacting to whatever's coming into their inbox or to their phone, social media or otherwise, rather than, as you said so eloquently, really, and this is something that we've actually talked about on the podcast before, so I'm excited that you brought it up. It's that idea of having a really clear big picture, kind of the overarching set of goals that you're ultimately working toward. And those have to be really, I mean, those goals have to be kind of rooted in your values as a human being, I think, too, in order for them to have strong, or to give you strong enough motivation, continue to push through, even when you don't necessarily, quote, feel like it. I'm amazed at the amount of kind of whining and complaining that a lot of people do, not just in the photo industry, when really we've got it made. You know, we live in this first world society where everything's right there at our fingertips if we want it, and yet we're complaining about the stupidest stuff. At the end of the day, we need to, as you said, step aside, take a step back, establish a really clear, big picture view, an overarching set of goals that we are working toward for the sake of ourselves, for our family, for our friends, or otherwise. And then once you've established those, it does give you a clear direction and ultimately motivation to work day to day, to kind of push you, to encourage you. And I think that's really important. I'm glad you point that out. And I would assume then, of course, based on your comments, that there have been times where you have struggled with that lack of inspiration as a photographer. I mean, did that happen early on in your career or more later on, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, so I feel like I got that kind of about 10 years in. I feel like I was at 10 years, I was kind of like, man, I don't know if I believe in this anymore. Like, I used to be like, okay, I'm all about super high-end weddings. I'm all about luxury. I want to live in a big house, drive a fancy car, wear all the top brand names of clothing. And I believe in it. I get it. I understand why people spend money on this stuff. And so I understand how to reach those clients who want to spend that kind of money. I understand the brand positioning. I understand all this stuff. It makes sense to me. And I believe it. I buy into it myself. But as I got older, I don't know if it was just spiritual maturity or if it was just like kind of burnout, or I saw behind the curtain, you know, I saw the Wizard of Oz standing there, this little guy behind this giant curtain. And I started thinking, you know what? I don't believe in this stuff. I don't know if I really believe in this stuff. I don't know if I buy into it. Like, I've had it all, I've done it all, and it's not fulfilling. It's not really what I want anymore. And so I hit this wall where I was like, you know what? I want to go choke some necks. Like, I want to go like get physical. I want to like black and white. I don't want this artistic subjectiveness, you know, to everything I do has someone's got an opinion on it. I want either someone taps out, like they win, or I win. And so that's why I got into jiu-jitsu, and I'm kind of bringing this to jiu-jitsu because like that was black and white for me. It was like, okay, no more games. Like, this is real. Like this, I'm grabbing somebody and I'm fighting with them, and one person wins, one person loses. And I needed that kind of like definitiveness in my life. which I didn't have with my career. I felt like it was all kind of fluff and,
Wow.
and marketing and opinions. And I needed something physical, something black and white. And then later in my career, after I kind of went through this jujitsu phase, I realized that's not fulfilling either. Like anything that you put in the place of God, that's not God, is going to leave you empty. And so what I realized is, like, you got to figure out your why in life. And I sat down and I said, what is my why in life? And what I determined was my why in life is to love God with all my heart, mind, and soul, and to love my neighbor as myself. And that comes from the Bible. And so once I got that why figured out, now I can compare everything I do in my life to that. And does it line up with that? And is my why, is what I'm doing in my business line up with my why in life? And so I think that's key. Like, you got to figure out what is your why in life before you start on anything else, before you figure out your marketing plan, before you figure out your target audience, what you're doing in your career, what you're targeting as far as like what types of photography you're doing, or even if you want to do photography full time, you got to figure out your why in life and figure out, what that big picture is. And then you can kind of, everything else should line up with that.
And that's so important. And I think I won't even try to expound on it. You've spoken so clearly and again so eloquently about the importance of this big picture view, clearly establishing your values. And it's a good reminder for all of us. If we haven't done that, we need to take some time, whether you go out the Joshua tree or sit in a quiet room somewhere, make sure you're clear about your why, because that really will drive you day to day. And it's so powerful. And I really appreciate the reminder, Mike. It's one that I need too. I need to consistently put that why in front of me. I know it helps drive me, and I know it's going to help drive our listeners to do the same thing. Let's make it tangible. Let's make it practical. Will you kind of share with our listeners? I mean, you started with this idea of the big picture. Maybe that's one of the ways, but how do you stay inspired as a photographer? And maybe our listeners can kind of take some inspiration from that for their own photography, for their own business.
Yeah. So, so I know myself pretty well after being in business for myself for so long. It's like, I kind of know how I tick and I understand what works for me and what doesn't. And maybe I'm just like super lazy to the core. Like I'm super entitled. I think I should just be able to, like, money should just grow on trees and I should be able to pull that money off trees and buy whatever I want. I don't know where it comes from, but what I found is that the only way I can get myself to really work hard is to trick myself into working hard. And it's all about like whatever I'm passionate about at the moment, whether it be sports, whether it be surfing, snowboarding, jiu-jitsu, whether it be rock climbing, like all the things that I love to do, whatever I'm really like on fire for at the moment, I try to build that into my work. I try to somehow like incorporate that into what I'm doing professionally in my career, that things that actually pay the bills. I try to incorporate that so that I can stay inspired, so that I can be like excited when I get up in the morning, when I wake up, my eyes open in the morning, I'm thinking, I can't wait to get started on this project. Like, I really want to go rock climbing, but I also really need to make some money. So let's do a photo shoot of a model in Joshua Tree, and I could like hang off of a rock and shoot her on this cliff with my ropes. You're going to be hanging off my ropes and shoot her on this edge of this cliff. Like, but I also want to get paid well for it. So let's figure out a proposition, a pitch to make to this wedding designer to do this, And so I get excited about it again. And so, I mean, that's a little trick, just to like try to figure out whatever it is that you'll get out of bed for in the morning that you're excited to do aside from work, or even if it's photography, like build that type of thing into what you're doing professionally.
I love it. That's really, really great. You mentioned the example of being in Joshua Tree and hanging off a cliff and photographing a client. What's another way maybe that you've done something like that where you've incorporated your passion into your work? I
could think of so with jiu-jitsu, I started shooting for UFC, which is kind of funny because I was like, that wasn't really paying the bills, but what it led to was booking weddings of fighters, like black belts in jiu-jitsu and MMA fighters started booking me as their wedding photographer, and it actually turned into work. So I used my passion for Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I started shooting on the mats and shooting tournaments, and then I started shooting cage fight for UFC, and that led to relationships. I'm following fighters along their story of their training camps and their leading up to their fights, and then making personal connections there, and then meeting their significant others, and then somehow ended up booking their weddings. So I think if you're passionate about what you're doing, people will see that. And if you're, doing something that's fun for you and you're excited about it, I mean, that's one of the reasons, coming back to the gear, it's like, if you ever get bored with what you're doing, it's because you're not improving. It's because you haven't found something new to do. And we always need to be finding something new. So like with Sony gear, I was like, okay, this is something entirely new, and it throws me outside of my element. Like now I have to completely relearn the technical side of photography because this gear is so different. The menus are all different. The settings are all different. And so that threw me outside of my element, and I got excited again about photography because I was learning, I was improving. I felt like there was some kind of improvement going on. And I think that's with any sport, with anything we do, career-wise, anything we're doing, the minute we stop improving, we get bored. You know, like I remember going snowboarding, and at the end of the day, if I wasn't like injured in some way or another, if I didn't have like some kind of ache or bruise or hyperextended arm or something, I was like, I'm not trying hard enough, and that's why I'm bored. I don't really feel like coming back tomorrow.
Yeah.
But like if I was like trying a new trick and I feel like I was getting something down and I was like landing it and maybe I just a little off, then believe me, the next day I'm back on the slopes. And so anytime I feel burnout in my career, or I get bored with what I'm doing, I try to mix it up, whether it's buying a new lens, buying new gear, whether it's trying something I've never tried before. I just made a post on Instagram about shooting in mixed temperature lighting.
I saw that.
Never do that. I always like, you saw that?
Yeah, it's a cool. Beautiful image.
Oh, thanks, man. So like I usually like will shut off any kind of tungsten lighting in the room and just use one light source because I don't like that mixed temperature of light. I don't like to deal with, okay, which white balance am I set at, and why is that yellow on this side of her skin and blue on this side of her skin? And so I'd always avoid that. And I'd either overpower the light with lighting, or I just shut off all the lights in the room and use window light. But for this particular image, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to shoot in the situation. It's what I have, and I'm going to see how it turns out, and I'm going to embrace it. You know, and it actually turned out to be the winning shot. They used it in an ad campaign that ended up being their favorite shot. And I'm like, wow, my mind was blown. And it got me like all excited again about shooting. I'm like, well, now I'm going to start incorporating this intentionally into my work.
Yeah, I'm looking at this picture. I actually pulled it up on Instagram. And again, for those of you listening, make sure to go check out Mike Colón's Instagram feed. It's just instagram.com/Mike Colón, MikeColon. And you can see his work there. But this beautiful bride in as you said, well, it's actually it looks like the one hotel near the Brooklyn Bridge. And she's got that window light that's kind of backlighting her, but then in combination with that incandescent light that you were mentioning, and the combination really is gorgeous. Make sure that you go check out Mike's work. So you started with that notion of a big picture. Make sure that you've clearly established your big picture, your why. That drives what you do day to day. And then figure out ways, secondly, to incorporate your passion into your work. And I think if photographers are willing to just make a little bit of an effort to get creative, to figure out how they can incorporate those things that they love so much into their work, that they'll be able to find ways to make ways to do so, find ways to improve or to challenge yourself, do things that you haven't done before. And of course, exemplified in this image that you posted to Instagram. I think that was a great third step. Do you have anything else to kind of add to finish this conversation off this time around, Mike, about how to keep inspired?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to maybe leave you with a quote. I've said this my whole career, and I've kind of fallen to it a couple times, but it keeps bringing more and more true as I go through my life. But the quote is, "The beginning of your downfall is the day you start believing your own hype." And I mean, I think what happens is we start having some success, and we start believing that success. It's important for confidence, right? You talk about us being emotional beings, and confidence and emotions are key in our artwork. But there comes a point where we start feeling entitled, and we stop doing the things that we were doing to get us there. And we start thinking that we don't have to do those things anymore. We don't have to treat people super nice and send gifts to people that take care of us. And we don't have to maybe like try as hard in marketing. We can kind of sit back, and we start feeling entitled. Like I've been around longer, you know, I should have that. Someone should just, you know, like I should have that lecture over that new guy when I'm talking about like a sponsor hiring a photographer to speak, you know, like I should be in that spot. And we stop trying as hard, and we start feeling entitled. And being entitlement is ugly. And when someone starts believing their own hype, it's ugly, you know, and people resist you. So the quote, "The beginning of your downfall is the day you start believing your own hype." For me, I heard that somewhere, and it's so true. And I remember thinking, don't ever believe your own hype. If you have hype, it's only because you're humble. It's only because you're an up and comer. It's only because you're starting out and people want to help you. And the minute you start believing it and you start feeling like you deserve it, people stop trying to help you, and people start thinking you're kind of ugly. And so I think that keeping that through your whole career, that humility, that eagerness to serve, that eagerness to give people more than you take give to people more than you take, that just excitement and that humility, I think, is key in life and in business.
Yeah, I think we've seen that too much in our industry, sadly, where there have been photographers that are just getting so caught up in their own hype, and they become very disingenuous and I don't know, just not as appealing an individual to be around anymore because they're so caught up in their own ego. And so I think your point is a good one. There's nothing wrong with being confident in your ability, and it's important, as you pointed out, to continue to work on improving your ability, your craft. But at the end of the day, if you don't maintain that humility, there's going to be a tendency to kind of get lazy in that, and of course that can significantly affect our business in a negative way. So thank you for ending on that note. It's a wonderful reminder. We'll make sure to put that quote in the show notes too for everybody. Maybe we can even create an Instagram story or a post that people can screenshot and stick it on the background of their phones. That'll be good. But it's a really, really great quote. Thank you so much for making time to share with us today, Mike. And could you just reiterate one more time for our listeners where they can follow you online, social media, website, and so forth?
Thanks, Nathan, man. It's been such an honor and a pleasure talking with you. And dude, we need to go back to Yosemite and hang out some more. Seriously, like this summer, I think we should do it. But anyways, thanks for letting me also plug my website and social media. My social media is just at Mike Colón, MikeCollon, and that's where like most of my recent images are coming. I'm actually like in the process of developing a strategy for YouTube. So I have a few videos up on YouTube as well. It's just Mike Colón, MikeCollon. So if you just go to YouTube, I think you just search Mike Colón, or it's like /Mike Colón. And then my website is also MikeCollon.com. YouTube, I have all these plans. I know how important it is to give back and to teach. And I think teaching is so key, and everyone should, no matter who you are and what level you're at, you should always be teaching.
Yeah.
One, teaching is a form of giving. Two, man, when you're teaching, you're actually learning. You're forced to study up and freshen up.
Yes.
And you're actually learning. So YouTube is kind of my next place. So keep an eye out on YouTube for new videos coming up. I'm going to try to hold myself accountable to that and try to make it fun, because I don't think video editing is fun. But I'm going to try to figure out a way to trick myself into doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, follow that, and then my website should be coming out within the month. So a month from today, I'm going to also hold myself accountable to launch my new website. So take a look there. And dude, again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Always fun talking with you. You're such a good guy. You have a great heart. I appreciate how you have this heart to share and to give, and it's always on solid. Like, you always have solid advice and caring advice. You can tell that you really love people, and I appreciate that about you, Nathan.
Well, first of all, that's very gracious of you to say that. I mean, there were multiple times in our conversation today where I got goosebumps, because it seems like we're on the same page on multiple levels. You've pointed out the significance of giving to other people, and this podcast has been a really wonderful opportunity to have conversation with all kinds of cool people in the industry. But I hope that in some way, in some form or fashion, it's helpful to those of you out there maybe that have been in business for a long time or just getting started, and especially when it comes to being able to learn from photographers like Mike. Mike, we definitely need to go back to Yosemite, and at some point we need to get out on motorcycles too. We've talked about this for a little bit, but
yeah, for sure, man.
We got to make that happen at some point too. But we'll make sure to link to all these resources that Mike just mentioned in our show notes. Thank you again, Mike, for sharing with the Bokeh Podcast listeners. Hope you have an absolutely wonderful day.
Thanks, man. Love you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast today. Will you let us know what you think by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or maybe in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast, maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My direct email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com.